So let me, we have a few minutes for discussion, so let me just pull the panel from the far side to this side. What is your one trial you think is going to have the most impact in this year and in the next 2 years? Most impactful trial. What do you think on the end? I'm sorry, I'm black. Thank you.
I think collectively the shorter DAPT duration trials are really going to be quite important because it's a clinical question that we struggle with quite a lot over the years, and certainly with the more recent stent platforms and the newer, stronger P2Y12 inhibitors that we have, I think it's a question that we'd like to answer more concretely. So I think in summary, collectively, that series of trials will be quite important.
So DAPT trials?
Yeah.
Okay. How about Dr. Sandoval?
A trial that wasn't discussed that I think to me it's really transformed the practice would be the COAC trial of the use of angiography following cardiac arrest. So to me, that's probably the most transformative thing that I've seen in the recent times.
Oh, great. Nobody mentioned that one, but that's good thinking. Poona?
I'd like the FAME3. I want to see if I can PCI versus cabbage. There's a lot of patients in the gray zone.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think FAME3 is going to have a different outcome than the syntax trials?
I don't know. We'll see.
What do you think, Chadi? FAME3 versus syntax 2? Syntax 2 was, they used IFR and added that into the angiographic scores and broke them into best results with PCI versus cabbage. So
I think this set can be slightly different because we understand that we can interpret FFR better now. So maybe it's going to be impactful in terms of how we interpret the data and how we treat the patients. That was on my list to be changing practice, I think, but the most controversial trial is going to be the ischemia trial. I think it's going to be making a lot of news this year, a lot of reports, and it's going to be a lot of discussion for the whole 2020.
okay, let me just move on. Dr. Miraj, do you think the ischemia trial is going to have impact?
So it depends on what you mean by impact. So by impact, if you mean the news and the media is going to bounce on that, yes. It's going to be an extremely newsworthy trial, probably misinterpreted by the general population severely, and misinterpreted in general because that's what most clinical trials really are nowadays. But I think for the sake of media purposes, it is going to be the most impactful trial in the next year. In clinical practice, I don't know if it's going to be that impactful. I think that's the truth. I think most of us practitioners understand the trial a little bit better in terms of the design, in terms of the issues, in terms of enrollment, et cetera, that we may not change our practice, but I think the world will think we should.
Okay, Dr. Gulati.
I think when the complete trial is negative, not if, but when it's negative, we're all going to stop doing multivessel PCI and STEMI, so I think that'll be the most impactful trial. I think when the ischemia trial is negative, we're all going to be discussing it for the next 10 years, but it won't change our practice for stable ischemic heart disease.
Exactly.
Good comment. So let me ask Alok, what do you think is the single most impactful trial coming? Your review of the literature.
I think ischemia is going to be the most influential, but shorter DAPT duration or trying to find what's the best DAPT strategy would be probably the practice-changing one.
Practice-changing one. Okay. Manny, what do you think is the most important single trial?
Well, I think I actually agree with Rajiv and Chadi. I think ischemia is going to get the more head news, the more controversial. I think people are anticipating to be negative. And when that happens, we're going to find about 20 reasons why the study was bad. And we'll be discussing this like courage actually it's a perfect opportunity. It's like 10-year anniversary of courage, so actually perfect continuation of that.
Great. Audience, any takers on that? Who thinks the ischemia trial is going to be the most impactful? Hands up. Hands up. A few. Who thinks the DAPT trials are going to be more impactful? Hands up. Looks even. Any other trials you think are going to beat either one of those two? Just yell it out. Okay. So, thank you very much. I have 5 minutes to talk to you about innovations in coronary physiology. And I thought I was just moderating this session, but they wanted me to give a talk. So you're going to hear me give a talk, no slides. How about that? Okay. So, innovations in coronary physiology are divided into 3 groups: technology innovations, software innovations, and clinical study outcome innovations. And this can be brief because I think hopefully those of you who have been interested in the field can be identifying those technology innovations. And these are the development of high quality, nitinol constructed fiber optic optical sensor guide wires, pressure wires that act as workhorse wires. So I believe this is a high advance in technical applications for the measurement of pressure in coronaries, but can also measure pressure anywhere. So for you who need high quality, high fidelity pressures in pulmonary arteries, renal arteries, peripheral arteries, you have pressure wires that can really do the job. So technology in terms of wire construction, and technology in terms of making the signal interfaces to our systems better, I think are the two big advances in that area. As for software advances, these are the computations derived from the pressure measurements, PAPD, and these are been spoke about many times, but they continue to now become available in the marketplace. So each of the major companies has a non-hyperemic pressure ratio, going by a variety of different acronyms, diastolic pressure ratio, diastolic wave-free fractional flow reserve ratio, relative flow, anyway, all of the initials are being provided by our industry to us to be able to use to get a more refined measurement over the available PDPA. And I think these are going to be incremental advances. The good news is all of the thresholds are the same. So mathematically, they're all the same, and clinically, they're all the same. So it makes life a little easier if you just remember the threshold number of 0.89. So software in terms of additional adjunct would be that of the use of computation for index of microvascular resistance, mostly applied to the post-STEMI patient prognosis. So if you measure microvascular resistance in that group, you're going to learn about the prognosis and recovery of the microvascular system and also the prognosis of the patient in the long term. Now, pullback software is available by Philips Volcano. Pullback software will be developed by the other companies in the field, and I think this will also be an innovation, and it would answer some of the questions that show up at the end of the defined PCI trial, where it said that a third of the patients had residual ischemia, a third had in-stent narrowing where the ischemia was, and a third had diffuse disease, and it's important to be able to separate that out with pullback. And I think the software to make pullback easier, either at rest or during hyperemia, will be another innovation in the physiology area. Now, finally, in the clinical arena, I think these outcome studies associated to the residual ischemia of the IFR are particularly important, because one of the unsettled areas is what happens to resting flow with interventions, and particularly after PCI, is the value of that non-hyperemic index equally valid when resting flow is different than it was when you started. So part of this will be to determine what that means in clinical terms. FFR, we kind of know what that means. The FAME3 outcomes for selecting patients best treated with PCI versus those treated with CABG is critically important. I think the FAME trial will go a long way to help us in that. I think the physiology areas involved with structural interventions, particularly aortic stenosis, to know about which coronary arteries need to be treated before you do your TAVR, and then, of course, again, after TAVR, what happens? I think that the same question is asked of the resting flow in the TAVR patients, which is under investigation and not quite fully answered. So in the coronary physiology, again, the last one would be the outcomes of what happens to the pullback changes that we see. What does that mean in terms of clinical events, and how aggressive should we be in treating all the physiology? So for innovations in physiology, the technology, the software, and the outcome studies are really continuing to move. I'd like them to move faster. I wish the industry would help us make a flow measuring system that was easy to use, quick, and like the Doppler used to be, but it's not anymore. And I think that would be a great innovation to come forward. So that's the end of my time. I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up from anybody who wants to know about coronary physiology. We had a wonderful breakfast session this morning to address some of this. Yes, Manny?
Yeah, thanks, Mort. That was phenomenal. The one question that comes up is about this calculated FFR, so to speak, from angiogram and for CT, a fast FFR. And I think you touched a little bit this morning, Zia touched on this and Arnold on the breakfast symposium. But how do you see them happening? Is the pressure wire going to be obsolete in 5 years?
Great question. So Manny asks us, is the pressure wire obsolete, or will it be obsolete in 5 years? And the answer is partly, it will be. So depending on the ease of use of the software applied to the angiogram to generate FFR-like information, the easier it is, the more confidence you have in it, and the wider the application will be. And indeed, if I could get FFR without a wire, I would like that. I don't mind to be put out of business. But I think that there are challenges to any time you're doing angiographically derived flow, pressure, and physiology. We've encountered this. QCA was thought to be better marginally. Two-dimensional QCA, three-dimensional QCA, and the generation of FFR, I think we're going to be at 80% accurate to the wire. So we will not completely get rid of the wire, even though we have a large acceptance of angiographically derived FFR from some company. The one that makes it the easiest and quickest, they win. And then others are going to have to catch up or die. But thank you.
And I wonder if you can quiz the panel about, what everyone says physiology is the thing to do, but no one does it.
Okay, did you want to go through that? So we will in just a minute. Let's take one more question before
A quick question about if you can guide us about tandem lesions. Like if in LAD you have a 40-50% proximal disease, 70% mid-LAD disease, positive FFR, you go and fix the more distal disease, your FFR actually, if you re-FFR it, paradoxically will be higher because now you have more blood flow going down there. Don't you think in tandem lesions, doing re-FFR and maybe fixing the other lesions should be mandatory?
Do I think that fixing in tandem lesions, treating one and fixing the other should be mandated?
Yeah, fix the first one that you think is the worst and re-FFR and decide if you need to fix the other one too.
Yes. Next question. No, so tandem lesions, you need to treat the ones that are producing ischemia, and if you get rid of one and the other one is producing ischemia, you got to get rid of the other one, right? If you get one and you don't have another, then you're in business. Short question?
Short question, Mort. So I do FFR, but I always do the IFR at the same time. What do you do when there's a discrepancy?
What do you do with the FFR-IFR discrepancy? Great question. That's perfect for the panel. So those of you who are doing IFR, FFR at the same time or using one over the other, what do you do with the discrepancy? Short answers. Alok, what do you do with the discrepant FFR, IFR?
I think it depends on the clinical situation too. If a guy has typical angina, I'll go ahead and fix it, but I trust the IFR more than the FFR because it has been shown that I think FFR can overestimate the stenosis.
Oh, you're killing me. So who do you trust, Dr. Gulati, IFR, FFR?
So I think related to that, I think for me, the extremes physiology is fantastic. So reassuringly negative or wildly abnormal, fantastic. This whole gray zone area, together with this discrepancy, IFR, FFR, that you always end up going to the patient and trying to figure it out using other means. So I think related to that discrepancy, the LAD, the outflow extent, all that stuff you can factor in, but ultimately you go back to other principles before picking one of those two, at least what I think.
I'm not sure I know who you trust, but we'll find out. So, Dr. Maraj?
So I think there's a patient discrepancy in the response to hyperemia. So FFR sometimes can be inaccurate. So personally, I agree with exactly what Rajiv said. I think when the extremes of IFR, you can believe it, you can trust it very well. Same would go with the extremes of FFR. The problem becomes in the gray zone area, and I totally agree with them completely. I think I go to the patient, ask the patient if the story sounds real, then I'm going to more likely do something if to not do something.
Okay, since it can't be answered in a short question, IFR versus last four
FFR.
panelists. IFR, FFR.
FFR, unless IFR is profoundly normal.
Puna?
I'm biased because I see a lot of AS patients, so IFR.
Dr. Sandoval,
For discrepancy, FFR.
on the end?
Same for discrepancy FFR.
Okay, so there you have it. No answer at all. So thank you very much.